Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour, if you'd like to join the conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Lathan Watts, and we're going to talk a little bit about the midterm elections. Some of you might be thinking, well, that's in the distance. And yes, for some of you it is. But again, the early voting in the state of Texas starts on Monday, Valentine's Day, and that election actually takes place on March 1st. Now, just for those of you in the listening audience, I just picked out a couple. In May, you have the midterm elections in Indiana and Ohio and Nebraska, Kentucky, North Carolina, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, to mention just a few. Then in June, you have California. Penn and I both grew up in California, where we remember the elections always were in there, but also Iowa, Mississippi, Montana, New Jersey, New Mexico, South Dakota, Maine, Nevada, South Carolina. And then by the time you get to August, you have Arizona, Kansas, Michigan, Missouri, Tennessee, Connecticut, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and many others. I didn't pick out all of them, but it just illustrates again that we might, for many people in the listening audience, think, oh, midterm elections, that's months from now. But for some of us around the table, we get to vote even on Monday.
We need to be studying the issues over the weekend to be ready for the primaries. And yeah, it's really a year of elections and primaries. And I always think it's exciting and a great opportunity to be able to weigh in, because the numbers of people that get involved in primaries are very low. So if you do get involved, you have an outsized influence on who your party's candidate becomes.
So again, just a great opportunity to talk a little bit about the midterms. One of the articles we've posted, Penna, is look how bad these numbers are, because this is a poll done by CNN. So you can't say, well, this was done maybe by Republicans or something. And it looks at the popularity of the current president at all-time lows. Now, there have been some times where certainly we've looked at how low the popularity has been of a Donald Trump, George W. Bush, whatever. But this is almost unprecedented, and not the kind of numbers you want to look at if you are convinced that you, as a president, want to hold on to your party holding on to the House and the Senate.
Yeah, and usually when a president, Biden is not going to be surprised by Congress moving toward the right, House or Senate. He's not going to be surprised by that. He already knows, because of these poll numbers, he's in trouble, and yet he hasn't recalibrated anything at all. And so I don't think that he's going. We've seen articles from people on the left that have said he's probably not going to get any better. He doesn't. It's not like he learns or puts his finger to the wind. He just is barreling ahead with a progressive agenda. That hurts everybody. That hurts the members of Congress who are running in more moderate districts as Democrats, for one thing. So, it looks to be right now that this is going to be a good election for Republicans and a bad election for Democrats. And then, we don't know whether Joe Biden will make any changes because of that, but a lot of people are saying, a lot of observers are saying that they doubt it.
Lathan, one of the things out of the poll, which was kind of interesting, is they ask Americans, what has President Biden done that they approve of? And 56% of Americans said nothing, zero. That's a zero with the edges rubbed off. Now, they didn't ask, what do you think Congress has done? But I suspect that maybe a few might say the infrastructure bill, but otherwise they might be tended to say nothing as well. And if you notice the number of chairmen and chairwomen of these various committees that are Democrats that have said, we're not going to run again.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's also typically an indicator of how the people in the party think that midterm is going to go. When you see folks who have been there for a long time decide maybe it's time for me to just call it a day, it's because they're looking at these numbers and they're looking at this presidency and like, this is going down like the Hindenburg. I mean, these numbers. So when you see a lot of retirements, that's also usually an indication that party is not expecting to do well in that midterm. And that is the historical norm. The first midterm after a president is elected, the party out of power typically picks up seats, with a very few exceptions. George W. Bush in 2002, kind of riding his wave of popularity after September 11th. I think one of the bigger defeats was Bill Clinton in the first midterm after his election in 94. You got the Republican
56
seats. 56 seats, the Republican Revolution, the contract with America, Newt Gingrich, the whole thing. Now, to Penna's point, Bill Clinton read the tea leaves, saw what went on, and basically just signed everything that Congress did and took credit for it and got reelected himself. Because
welfare reform.
Exactly. You have he who ran as this, populist Southern Democrat gets up and with a straight face gives a speech where he says the era of big government is over. Now, I've often said that one of the greatest attributes of our friends on the other side of the aisle is their audacity. And that took some audacity, I will tell you. So if Biden, wants to get anything done in what's left of his first and maybe only term, he would read, a beating at the midterms this way and maybe try to find, some common ground with these guys and see if they could get something done. He hasn't indicated that he's inclined to do that at all. And, another indicator is these, like you mentioned, the moderate Dems or people who are running in competitive districts. They're running, and they are running away from him like their hair is on fire. They don't want him in the same state with them campaigning. And that's an indication of just how unpopular they think he is as well. At this point, he might as well put on a cardigan and start farming peanuts, because this is Jimmy Carter Part 2. Nobody's better at snatching defeat from the jaws of victory than the Republicans. But right now, it does look like a potential shift in the Congress, because they only have about a +5 in the House to get control, and a net +1 really in the Senate. So, but the polls in those Senate races are not looking good. They could, if the election was held right now, they could lose all of them. They could go over in the midterms, and at the very least, it's going to probably jam things up and slow things down, and not a whole lot's going to get done. And I never sleep better than when my government's not getting a lot done.
Let's take a break. But one of the things that I published on Tuesday was based on something that Dr. Merrill Matthews, now he's not here to defend himself, but I want to see what you think about that, because he said, we have always been hearing about a red wave, but maybe we might have a red tsunami, because as we pointed out, you had 54 more House seats that were won in 1994. You had 64 more Republican House seats in 2010. But both Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, I think we would agree, were very good politicians.
Absolutely.
When you apply that same criterion to Joe Biden, I see everybody shaking their head. So after the break, I want to get your thoughts about that, because it's one thing to win a bare majority in the House or the Senate. It's another to really kind of sweep the House and do some things that you haven't seen a long time in American politics. So we'll get into that, because after all, it was a piece by Dr. Merrill Matthews, and then I did a commentary, came out on Tuesday, and it just reminds us that the 79-year-old occupant in the Oval Office is not only unpopular, but probably not the politician of Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. But we'll get your comments right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Stacey Lance has been a teacher in the Canadian public school system for the past 15 years. Her recent essay laments that kids aren't all right. She begins by saying she isn't a doctor or an expert in virology, but she does know her students, and she is very sad about what they have experienced these last 2 years. Of course, there is the students' loss of learning and their mental issues, but what is overlooked, she says, has been the deep shame young people feel. Our students were taught to think of their schools as hubs for infection and themselves as vectors of disease. Initially, her school went fully remote, and there was the inevitable loss of human connection so important to her students' development. But even when they were back in school, there was no life in the building. Maybe it was the mask that made it so that no one wanted to engage in lessons or even talk about how they spent their weekend. The students she teaches are anxious and depressed. Even the outgoing students are now terrified at the prospect of being singled out to stand in front of the class and speak. And many of my students seem to have found comfort behind their masks. They feel exposed when their peers can see their whole face. Her heartbreaking description of what the lockdowns have done to her students goes on for pages. In fact, columnist Kyle Smith cites large sections of her essay but alters one important fact. Stacey Lance says we betrayed our children. Kyle Smith changes the verb tense. We are betraying our children every day all across this country. To be blunt, we are abusing our children on a mass scale. This essay is a poignant reminder of the damage done and the damage being done to the next generation. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Critical Race Theory, go to viewpoints.info/CRT.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Going to talk about the elections for a little bit longer, then we'll get into the Olympics. A very good piece that came out of the Wall Street Journal about turning off the Olympics, something we've encouraged some of you to consider doing. Also, a potential Supreme Court nominee on the whole issue of religious liberty, which we'll talk about. Of course, we have Penna Dexter's commentary, which we'll talk about as well, pre-K study. But let's take a phone call first. Head out to the state of Maine. And Steve, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for taking my call. I'm just listening, just catching the beginning of this, and I just can't help but think, you were mentioning the difference in political,
Ability.
how much of a politician...
Yeah.
Yeah, political ability. Yeah, thank you. Of Biden, I think he was. I think it's the machine that's at fault for putting him in the position he's in, and now he's being used as a puppet by both our Democratic Party and by other countries. Is a big danger. But he certainly is no politician. I just think your point was well made. I also don't think it's just him alone. I think the entire party is to blame for this terrible situation.
I think the puppeteers are so progressive; they're so far to the left, and in some sense, when you have those goals to transform the society to, pretty much of a totalitarian sort of regime, where people lose their freedom, where the government plans everything and decides everything, those people, it's almost. It colors their judgment, so they don't do smart things, and I think they're the ones that Joe Biden has allowed to control him. They're the ones that wanted him in power because they thought they could do it behind the scenes, and I don't know why they didn't expect him to say so many things out there that they didn't want said, but he has done that. Mm-hmm. He's gone off the reservation that way, but also their policies are so unpopular, and they don't see it because they're deluded by their liberalism. I think it does delude people, and they think that it can work, and it can't work. It doesn't work. It's been proven over and over with various civilizations and various regimes that it doesn't work. And we're trying it, and it's not going to work.
I was thinking from a marketing point of view, there's two phrases you oftentimes hear, and one is buyer's remorse. And after every presidential election, you have a little bit of buyer's remorse. It turned out that you were hoping for this individual to do more than he or she was able to accomplish. But there's a second one, and it's bait and switch. And I think that's the other thing. Most Americans that are in this survey, it's the third article we've posted here, that have been interviewed, I think are expressing the fact that we thought we were electing somebody who was sort of like a moderate, maybe a little left of center, but we didn't think we were electing Bernie Sanders, and we didn't think we were electing AOC, right?
Yeah, and I think that's what made him so dangerous to begin with. That's what some people at the time were saying, is that if he is just sort of the face or the place filler so that the so-called, puppeteers can pull the strings, that's what makes him so dangerous, because you don't know who is pulling the strings.
Yes.
And he did sort of campaign as like the adult in the room. And when you look back on those Democratic presidential debates and how completely off the deep end the rest of that field was, that's the only way you can make a guy like Joe Biden look like a moderate and a centrist. And that's big. I mean, the left is either incredibly bad at reading the electorate and where they are and what they will accept, or they don't care.
Yeah.
Like it is, okay.
It's both, probably.
Yeah. And I think it is a little bit of both, because historically they've done it before. You look at George McGovern, right? I think the left made the mistake that everybody hates Nixon as bad as we do. So we're guaranteed to win. So let's take our absolute loon as far as left as we can get and run this guy. That's the only way we could get somebody like this elected, is with a guy so unpopular as Nixon. And then they found out, well, Nixon was unpopular, but then we took a look at who you were running, and he looks okay by comparison, right? And you end up losing in a landslide. So I think there's a little bit of that went into Joe Biden, and now combine that with buyer's remorse. He has been completely ineffective. The things that he has been effective at have been really bad for the country. I mean, you don't get nearly 8% inflation in a year unless you have been effective at flooding the economy with government spending, and that's what he did. And if he had properly read the electorate, the message that came from the electorate was, don't be Donald Trump. That was it. Just go up there for 4 or 8 years and don't be that guy. He seems to have read it as, hey, go be FDR on steroids. Okay. And you would think that seeing that you've got a House that's as close as it is and a Senate that is as close as it is would be an indication that you're not going to be able to get something very extreme passed. And yet, day after day, he gets up and he keeps going after it.
I don't think they should have been surprised, though, because right after the election, Joe Biden, and even in the early days before the election, he and Bernie Sanders were talking. And after the election, they made formal agreements that Bernie Sanders' agenda would be included on multiple issues. And so he already was, allowed that. And then the other part of that is Chuck Schumer, who is the leader, the majority leader in the Senate, is so afraid of a primary from AOC that he has gone much further to the left than he normally would, and that is really prudent for him with regard to getting some of his senators in more moderate districts reelected. So they've had to take these moves to the left. I think that negotiating with Bernie was not smart; it was dumb. And so now they aren't able to turn back on some of it. And I think that Schumer is really afraid, and he's operating out of fear, which is sad for a majority leader.
Yeah, let's use some examples that maybe illustrate your point. You have some members of Congress right now that are saying, would you stop saying defund the police? Did you see the other day Cory Bush says, no, we believe in defunding the police. So
just stop saying it, though.
Yeah,
they're just saying stop saying it.
Yeah, and so it's interesting. So on the one hand, she's saying no, and he's saying, and we can take all sorts of members of Congress now that are starting to have said some pretty radical things that they actually have no fear about saying. AOC, for example, we've talked about that, and a variety of others of the squad have said some pretty radical things because they're in relatively safe districts, and they could run basically on the Communist Manifesto and probably win. But their fellow colleagues are saying, would you stop saying this? And there's been an internal fight right now within the Democratic Party about those issues. And then when you add to that the fact that gerrymandering, which has been done by a lot of these state legislatures that are Republican, are also making it even easier for some Republicans to win in some of these cases. There'll be two additional members from Congress right here from the state of Texas because of that. This could look like a red tsunami, don't you think?
That's also an indication if you look at how many incumbent Republicans drew primary challengers this time. When they always think they've got a chance of really doing well, and that the primary basically is the election, you'll see a lot of incumbents get primary challengers.
That's
because
true.
the people come out of the woodwork thinking, if I can just win the primary, I'm going to win the general. I'm going to ride this wave. And there are several now who have primary opponents.
Let's take another phone call because it gets us into another issue of the elections. Fran in Georgia, just before we take a break, I think you have a question about mail-in balloting.
Yes, I'm still concerned that the Democrats aren't too worried about the red tsunami because they've got a lot of states where they have approved a lot of mail-in balloting.
Well, again, where are we on that? Maybe we'll take a break and come back and talk about that a little bit because we are close to a break. But I think we have seen some really significant changes that are taking place in some states, including your own state of Georgia. And in some respects, I've said this before, that when you see people complaining about these voter integrity laws, it isn't an illustration of voter suppression or Jim Crow 2.0. It's an indication that the possibility that somebody could cheat has been pretty much eliminated. To use the old West Texas phrase, if you throw a rock in a pack of dogs, the one that yelps the loudest is the one that got hit. And some of these people are complaining because some of these laws are really preventing that. So we'll see where this goes. And of course, a lot of that has to do with what's happening in these senatorial races, 33, and the congressional races, 435. And that's why you need to be a poll watcher, because we'll talk about some of the things we can do there. But Fran, you raised a good question, and I think we'll put that on the table. When we come back from a break, we'll see if we can give you a little better answer. All that coming up right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Lathan Watts, Penna Dexter. And if we can, for just a minute, Fran was wondering about these mail-in ballots. And certainly we see, Penna, some states, which of course are going to mail-in ballots, and there are certain states that only you can vote by mail. But I have seen some remarkable changes taking place because some of the state legislatures have finally decided to assert themselves. And we'll have Lathan remind us of the fact that the Constitution says that the states control the elections, right?
Yes. I think the biggest problem with mail-in ballots is states sending them out unsolicited, because then they end up in places where people can take them and do a lot of mischief with it. And so that many states have legislated against that. I think you mentioned Pennsylvania has just passed something. They were one of the ones that were doing that. And then you have the ID that's required with a mail-in ballot. I know in Texas and Georgia, and I don't know where all else, you have to just fill in your driver's license number or the last four digits of your social security number to identify yourself, to say that that's you. So that helps a little bit. I don't like mail-in balloting. I really don't like absentee balloting either. I think we should be voting on Election Day. And, maybe some provable reasons why we might get an absentee ballot like it used to be. But at least there's been some more controls put in. The other thing that I find interesting is that some states are now finally cleaning up their voter rolls, and that's being challenged by the left. The fact that you would pass a law, say, in Texas or in Georgia that says, okay, states need to be cleaning up, getting rid of the dead people and the people that have moved away, just making it just cleaner so that the voters on the rolls are who they are. And that's challenged. And so, states are passing law. These are common sense laws. There are things that should have been being done and were being done before, things that are done in a lot of, remarkably, in blue states. Blue states often have stricter voter laws than some of these purple states, and the purple states is where the mischief has been being done.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. I think it was the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, if I remember it correctly, that recently ruled on some of the provisions that have been put in, supposedly because of COVID, during the last election, that had not been done by the legislature and therefore unconstitutional. And just like Kerby said, I mean, the Constitution delegates, elections to the states, and that means the state legislatures, not the Secretary of State, not some board appointed by the governor, not the governor. Lawmakers make laws. And so some of these states have done some things. I agree, especially with, purging of the voter rolls. I mean, here's a relatively simple bill that you could file in any state legislature in the country and just say, how about every 10 years, like the same 10 years we do the census, we completely purge the voter roll. Just make everybody register to vote again every 10 years. That's not an impediment to voting. I mean, you have to do something to vote, register to vote. That would get rid of all the dead people, get rid of all the people that have moved who might get a ballot mailed to their old address, and just make everybody go register again.
Sure. You have to renew your driver's license and other things, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a fairly simple thing that you could do.
That's not voter suppression. That's just
because it treats everybody the same.
Right.
If you want to vote, every 10 years you renew your voter registration. And then the only people registered to vote will be the people who sign up and register to vote. You don't have to worry about the dead folks.
There you go.
At least every 10 years.
I'm holding up a Constitution just in case you say, now, wait a minute, where in the world does that come from? Get your Constitution out right now, Article 1, and we're talking about Section 4 of Article 1. The times and places and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. What a concept. And when it is done by someone other than a state legislature, it seems to me that a lot of the judges, at least those that actually believe in the Constitution, have to throw those out. And so if you're saying, well, what can we do? Some of it could still be done right now because, as I've pointed out, some of you aren't going to be voting for a couple of months. So that, I think, is good news. But we've got some more phone calls, so let's take another one. We'll head out to New Mexico this time. KPCL and Keith, thank you for joining us today.
Well, I thank you, Kerby, and I thank you for Penna Dexter and the job that you guys are doing. I just wanted to, you're talking about voter registration and voting and things of that nature. One of the things that I noticed in the state of New Mexico the last time we went to the polls was when we was electing a president, a lot of the people, when you done early voting, they gave you a felt tip pen and to mark your ballot with. And I said, well, I've got a pen right here. And they said, no, you need to use that pen. Well, I realized what they was doing. When you use a felt tip pen on the readers that they have nowadays, it will not read that felt tip pen. So if people will pack a ballpoint pen in their pocket, and when they give you a felt tip pen, just stick it in your pocket, use the ballpoint pen, and then your vote will count on a lot of stuff that you're voting on. I thank you very much, and God bless the program that you guys have. I support you 100%, and thank you for the hard work that you do.
Well, I appreciate that. And remember, there was some questions about whether or not you could use this kind of pen or pencil or those kind of things. I just check and find out what kind of readers you have. I live in a county that's not far from here. Having been a precinct chairman, we have really developed various kinds of ways in which you can vote on a piece of paper. It slides through and counts it, but it gives you a paper record. And again, as soon as it slides through, it shows up. And I was able to see, for example, when my wife voted, when my daughter voted. I even checked out when Kelly Shackelford voted and when I voted. And so the possibility of any kind of mischief just evaporates because, first of all, we have an electronic record, but then that's the other thing, we have a paper record. And so if somebody's engaged in some kind of mischief by giving you a pen that doesn't record, you'd have a discontinuity, some kind of discrepancy between the two. And so if we could just get to a point of having free and fair elections, I can go to an ATM machine anywhere in the world and can be assured that by typing in very quickly a passcode that I can have access to my money. And if I even want to get it in the particular denomination or currency in that country, I can do that. And we can solve this problem very easily electronically.
We have the technology
we
to do it.
We have the technology.
It's the will.
And so in some respects, Lathan, when we hear these kinds of stories, we say, well, we really want to make it easy to vote, but hard to cheat, right?
Exactly. I mean, that should be the root cause and the purpose and the goal of any legislation that's passed that has anything to do with voting. Make it harder to cheat.
Yes.
Easy to vote and harder to cheat.
And I love those machines. By the way, I could tell when Kelly voted or when my family voted or when I voted.
And you can go talk to them and remind them to vote.
But I could not tell how they voted. But I could even tell you the name of the person at the election office or the polling place that actually helped them in the first place. That's the kind of system we really need to have nationwide, because then it just simply goes away. But when we simply say that, well, we're going to have these places where you can bring in these mail-in ballots. And now we have pictures, especially during the Georgia Senate elections, of people bringing in multiple ballots and dropping them in.
Drop boxes.
And by the way, that drop box, isn't that the next film coming out with Dinesh D'Souza? 2,000, what did he call it, mules, I guess it was?
Right.
2,000 mules, 2,000 individuals out there manipulating those elections. And once we see that, that's all the more reason to get rid of those drop boxes. And it's all the more reason for you to be a poll watcher. So I'm going to encourage some of you, as these midterm elections take place, go to the polls and you can sign up. You get a little bit of training, and then you can sit there and make sure that there's no mischief taking place. And that's certainly something you've been working at over the years at First Liberty. I know Kelly Shackelford years ago started actually supporting True the Vote and people like that. And you can think about Christians Engaged. You were actually helping them make sure they'd actually get their tax exempt status and all sorts of things, right?
Yeah. Former client that, her ministry is to try to get people of faith engaged in the process, pray for elected officials, vote in every election, and engage in some form or another. And, really, I mean, the reason why you want these things in place, like we said, to make it harder to cheat and easier to vote, is that people need to have confidence that their vote counted. And what we've seen, in at least the last two elections, is that when there's opportunity to cheat, and let's be clear, there's always going to be people try to cheat the system.
Of course.
If you can minimize it to the greatest degree possible, then even if you lose, there's not that animosity of it was stolen. And we've seen that in at least the last two elections. And all that does is ramp up the animosity for the next two years for whoever won, right? And you need that sense of security in elections. It helps sort of take the country's temperature down after the election. If you say, okay, fair and square, we lost, versus I think they stole it.
Yeah. And then you have even the senatorial elections. I think you had some people didn't vote because they couldn't be assured that they would have.
I think that happened in Georgia.
I think it did. Well, you're going to hear Penna Dexter's commentary. When we come back, we'll talk about that and a couple other issues right after these important messages.
Following the Biden administration's admission that its Build Back Better plan is dead, there's an effort to resurrect parts of this massive social spending bill. One goal is the White House's proposal for a transformational investment, $200 billion, for free universal pre-K for 3- and 4-year-old children. The plan is modeled on the Head Start program, which was launched in 1965 to get kids from low-income families prepped for kindergarten. This push comes despite extensive research showing Head Start's dismal results, including one finding that elementary school kids who didn't participate were better prepared in math than those who started the program at age 3. Forget raising kindergarten performance. A long-term study on the state of Tennessee's pre-K program found that children who attended it fared worse in 6th grade than children from similar backgrounds who didn't participate. The state's program has existed since 2005 and meets 9 of 10 federal benchmarks. Researchers at Vanderbilt University are following 2,990 low-income children. The Wall Street Journal reports that the program was oversubscribed, so researchers followed applicants who ended up in the program versus those who were turned away. So all kids in the study had parents who were motivated to sign them up for pre-K. Over time, students who had attended the pre-K program also exhibited more disciplinary infractions and attendance problems and needed more special education services than those who did not attend. The findings of this study are reported in the Journal of Developmental Psychology. Its authors say that the Tennessee program doesn't have any distinctive characteristics that are a likely explanation for the disappointing findings. Perhaps most 3- and 4-year-olds aren't ready for more rigid academic settings. We really don't have evidence to show that universal pre-K would be a worthwhile investment. The left continues to push government-funded preschools as a way to begin influencing kids early in life. We shouldn't revive any pieces of the Build Back Better program, including this one. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention that oftentimes we play Penna Dexter's commentary right now. If you happen to be listening online, you had a chance to hear it. And if not, we always make it available to you. It is on our website right now. And so you can find out a little bit more about her piece on the idea of pre-K study. But it's all under this idea of transformational investment. Now, doesn't that sound good? Penna, help us understand why, again, we're grateful that some of that didn't actually pass in the Build Back Better Act.
Well, transformational investments are things that change, make big cataclysmic changes. And, I read something this week, an article or an editorial, Build Back Better is dead, 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 dead. It's dead. Yeah, it is dead, but not the parts of it, because now Joe Biden has said, well, he'd like to resurrect parts of it, and there are parts of it that even Senator Joe Manchin would go for. One of those is the pre-K, universal pre-K part of it, which should be dead, dead, dead. It's terrible, and it is transformational if it's passed. And so it was good to see a study out. It kind of follows on the studies that have been done over the years since 1965, since Head Start started, which is the preschool program that's supposed to get kids ready for kindergarten. But what it's shown is that they're worse prepared for kindergarten. And now this new study out of Tennessee done by Vanderbilt, which this confirms other studies that they've done. This kind of a long-term study is showing that even by sixth grade, kids that have been in these pre-K in the Tennessee pre-K program, which is supposed to meet all the federal benchmarks except one, that these kids do worse in sixth grade than kids that didn't go to pre-K.
Wow.
Which is something I've always contended. I feel like kids should be allowed to be kids. And if you're blessed enough to be able to be home with your children, then it's better to actually just have them home with you. That's my opinion. Mm-hmm. But a lot of parents put their children in pre-K, but we don't need federal pre-K run by the government. And this study is just another confirmation of that. It's good to see that kind of study out there right now when we have this talk about taking parts of the massive Build Back Better and still putting billions of dollars into something that is not just, it's not just an afterthought. This would be a transformation, because anytime you start getting hold of kids early and it's a government-funded program, the government can get some of their ideas and begin to start earlier than they already are starting with our kids in public school. So to get studies and get the information out there that says this doesn't even work academically, let's not do it.
Reminds me of a representative the other day that simply said, look, parents should not have any authority over the teaching of their kids. And as a result, if they want to, well, then they can homeschool or actually go to a Christian school. And that gets back to, Lathan, one of the issues you have before the Supreme Court on an issue of school choice, of all things.
Yeah, exactly. Carson versus Macon was the case that we had in front of the Supreme Court earlier this term. So we're expecting a decision, hopefully by June. Where Maine had a school choice program for areas of the state that don't have enough kids to justify the state building and operating schools. And so they give those parents the money to send their kid to a school of their choice, unless they chose a religious school. So, oops. Exactly. Yeah. Thinking that somehow, allowing parents to use, and remember, it's taxpayer money. It's their money. Okay? It's not the government. Their point was that, well, that's, government funds going to a religious institution, and that somehow violates the Establishment Clause. Well, where does the government get its money? It gets its money from the taxpayers. It's the parents' money to begin with. Okay. And so, the Supreme Court's been clear on this. You don't have to have a program like this, but if you do, you cannot discriminate against religious institutions.
So you're going to win this one, probably.
We hope so. Yes, because there was a previous case out of Montana, almost identical facts, and they did that. That's basically what the Supreme Court says. Is, look, Montana, you don't have to do this, but if you do, you can't discriminate against religious schools. So apparently Maine didn't get the memo, and here we are back at the Supreme Court again. So hopefully that will be another victory for us. But Penna's point about universal pre-K, it's one thing to keep throwing money at a program that's not working. It's even worse to throw more money at a program that's making things worse. I mean, the studies used to be that there's no discernible difference between somebody who went to pre-K and somebody who didn't. Now the studies are actually showing the people that didn't go are doing better than the people who did. And, not to, sound like a broken record talking about, the proper role of the federal government as, outlined in, the U.S. Constitution. There is no authority in the U.S. Constitution for the federal government to have anything to do with education. Mm-hmm. It is supposed to be exclusively the states dealing with education. So if we want to see less of this nonsense and you having to fight more and more often about what your kids are being, indoctrinated with by government schools, get the federal government out of it altogether. And I point the finger squarely at the people on my side of the aisle. Ours have talked tough about the Department of Education for decades, and it is still there. And get rid of it. You've got a midterm election coming. You're likely going to take control of the legislature. If you take the White House 2 years after that, there's a campaign promise. If you're running for president in a couple of years, you're running in the primary, say day one, I will take action to get rid of the Department of Education.
It would be a perfect opportune moment now because parents are much more disturbed than they have been on what's going on in the schools.
Yeah, it's the law of unintended consequences, right? That was what happened when you forced kids to stay home and go to school online. And a lot of parents who never once paid attention to what was going on in their classroom walked by and heard what was going on in the classroom and are like, whoa, what? And so now you've got a whole lot more parents involved in education. And again, the people in power who think they're in control don't like that. And that's why you get people like the National Association of School Boards calling parents domestic terrorists for showing up at school board meetings protesting against the nonsense and or dangerous material that their kids were being fed with their tax dollars. Mm-hmm. So if, anybody out there who's thinking about running for president, there's a campaign promise that I think would do you very, very well. Glenn Youngkin won the governorship of Virginia on this issue, on education.
We started the program with Canadian truckers, and we're ending the program with parents being called domestic terrorists who are just out there trying to advocate for the interests of their children. I think it's a moment in the history of our country, also Canada, I guess, where we actually could make a difference. We, the citizens, we, the people, can make a difference. We can make a change. We're the ones that should be doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's if this election and the next one are still sort of the post-COVID and the COVID fallout elections, campaign on ending the Federal Department of Education and firing Anthony Fauci, you'll win.
Sounds good.
You might not win the general, but I guarantee you'll win a Republican primary.
Certainly will. Well, we're just about out of time. And, of course, some people might want to read the article also about Leandra Kruger, who is not exactly a fan of religious liberty. Have some things about turning off the Olympics. But I suspect most people will turn on the Super Bowl. But if you join us next week, we have Wayne Grudem with us. We have Jerry Newcomb. We have Shannon Bream and a number of other individuals. So it's going to be a great conversation. And we'll have Kelly and Penna with us next week on our Friday weekend edition. So I encourage you to find some of these other articles that we never got to, but we certainly covered quite a bit today. Penna, thank you for being here. Lathan, as always, the snarky parenthetical, if people want to follow you in another venue as well. And I want to thank Doug for his help as an engineer, Steve for his help as a producer. Go to the website, pointofview.net. You'll find all those articles we've mentioned, Penna Dexter's commentary as well as mine. And we hope that you'll have a great weekend. I suspect you'll watch the Super Bowl. We'll see who wins. And we'll look forward to seeing you back here on Monday, right here on Point of View.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas recently said, "The Declaration of Independence has weathered every storm for 245 years. It birthed a great nation. It abolished the sin of slavery, and it endeavored to address its effects. While we have failed the Declaration time and again, and the ideals of the Declaration time and again, I know of no time," said Thomas, "when the ideals have failed us." While some see our founding as fatally flawed and promote ideas that have failed every time they've been tried, at Point of View, like Justice Thomas, we still believe in America's ideals. And if you do too, make a difference today. Join the Truth Team as we promote the unchanging truth that gave us liberty and prosperity. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The original Americans responded to the call. Will you? Pointofview.net/team and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.